come in. Okay, so here with Chuck Phillips. I guess let's just start. You created, there was a lot of controversy, obviously, that came out around your LA Times article. And the most recent things has been the retraction of the article by the LA Times.
This is the article about the quad, right?
About Quad Studio, yeah, and Jimmy Roseman's involvement. Right. And then after more recently, Dexter Isaac has come out saying that he was actually paid by Henchmen. Right. So you've then retracted the retraction.
I've asked.
In a sense. You've asked for the retraction. They're not going to do it. Well, could you just kind of maybe update us from this point forward? Like, is there any new information about that, or what's kind of your personal statement on that matter?
My story was accurate. You know, the guy Jimmy Sabatino that made the documents. I found out now he didn't make them alone. He made them with a friend of Roseman's who was in prison with him, Henchmen. And that guy, he knew more about the quad than Sabatino now, I think. Yeah, so that was I wrote the story based upon my sources. There were 2 people who were involved in the beating, and then there were 3 people who Henchmen had spoke to about what happened. Those were my sources in New York for the story, and that's bits and pieces they all agreed on. Mostly it was basically the Henchmen set this up because Tupac wouldn't sign with Henchmen as a manager, and Haitian Jack and Henchmen were trying to do a management deal with him. They took him all over the city, took him everywhere. And then initially he wouldn't sign with Puffy. Puffy wanted him to sign with Bad Boy, and he was already signed to Interscope, but he was trying to get him over there, right? And he said no. And then they said they could bring him to Bad Boy. They would manage him and they would bring him. And then he said no to Haitian Jack and Henchmen, and that's why he got beat up.
So he had already turned down Puffy's overtures to Bad Boy, and then that's kind of a little idea of why Henchmen and Roseman started taking him around on New York. Like, 'cause I guess from the fan base perspective, we always known like they were taking him around because he was studying him, trying to imitate Birdie for the role of
Haitian Jack, right? And he was doing that, but he also they were trying to get something out of him. And what they wanted, they were moving from being drug dealers and drug dealing robbers of drug dealers into the management, because they thought there's going to be more money in the rap world than what they're doing right now. And eventually Henchmen did get the company going, which we now know was a front for his drug operation. Wow. At least the government believes that. Now Henchmen, so that was the reason he got beat up. And according to the guys, I've learned things since then, since I wrote the story. That was 3 years ago. They say, which they didn't tell me then, that Tupac shot himself. I wrote that in the story, that Tupac shot himself. But I didn't realize that there were no other shots fired. There weren't 5 shots fired, according to these guys.
I have my own theories in my head of what happened that night, only because when Pac came out the elevator, he was conscious, he was talking, he was rolling up some weed, he said a few things. I didn't see 5 bullet holes in Tupac as reported. You can ask Andre Harrell and all of these people that was there. There was over 15 people there.
There was 1 shot fired, and it was Tupac to his nuts. They pistol whipped the hell out of him, and they really, he was bleeding badly. They beat him all over his body. And according to these guys, they were told to make it look like a robbery. And if you read that one interview with Tupac, he said it's like they hated me, or something. I can't remember what he said. It's like they had something against me, the way they were beating him and kicking him and saying shit to him. And then they left his Rolex on. They stole everything else, but they left that on to let him know it really wasn't a robbery. And so that was who I interviewed for the story, and I built the story upon that. I was looking into the murder of Biggie when I was out in New York, and I came across somebody I met who knew a lot of stuff, and then I checked out what he said, and it was pretty good. And then I approached the actual guys, who Dexter is now, he's publicly known. He was one of them. There were some other guys. And then, that was probably, I think the letters, I have letters from the guys that beat him up. So it's in writing, it's not just my word, because usually you gotta take notes. But then along comes this Sabatino character. He calls me up. It's like closer to, I think the letters to them were in June, July, August of 2007. And then he comes around, I think around September, October, I can't remember, around that time, the fall. And he's going to file a lawsuit against Puffy, is what he tells me. And he thought I'd be interested in writing about it. And I said, what do you know about me? He knew everything about me. And so so I said, I don't write stories on lawsuits being filed, but I read them after the file, And I said, call me back when you're ready, So then he filed a lawsuit, and then I wrote a little it was a 10-inch story, nothing. He filed a lawsuit, here's what he says, blah, blah, blah. And then he's a in federal prison, I get lots of calls from prisoners, right? So in state prison, you can accept their call and pay for it. In federal prison, when they call you, they've already had to pay for it. So you just have to accept the call. And he kept calling all the time. He's like, and then eventually he says to me, I got some 302s in my case that reference the quad situation. I said, really? And then he tells me where they are, and I look them up, and he does have some, and I'm thinking,
302s?
Yeah, FBI 302s, and which are like, for anybody who doesn't know, it's like a document, it's a raw interview by the agent, and then he types it up. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true, even when it's real. I've been counted that myself with other stories that I worked on. FBI agents don't always tell the truth. But anyway, so I get these things, and my point isn't that they're going to support my article, and you can read it. There's interviews I gave that day. Everybody was talking about the FBI documents as if that's proof that it's true. I mean, to me, that's not proof that it's true. And there's lots of LAPD things about Biggie's murder. They're completely false. But they think because they wrote them that they're true. They make a lot of mistakes, and they actually make not necessarily. They do it on purpose sometimes. They write things into their documents that they want to get out. So in this case, but the lawyers, as you know probably with your website, it's always good to have documentation to support what you're writing about. So when I got these documents, the lawyers were thrilled, and my editor, everybody thinks this is a better story now because we've got documentation that says the same thing, similar. It actually says all kinds of things that I didn't have in my article, but it does say Jimmy Henchmen set up the pot beating. And that's all I cared about. And if you can look at, like, I think they did this one kid on DX, Hip Hop DX, I think it's .com or something like that. He interviewed me that day, so you can go in there and look at it. And I'm saying the documents aren't what's important. I talked to the guys who did it. And so then when they're writing it, they're saying, well, we got these documents, I think we should incorporate more of what's in the documents. No one's had an FBI document on this. And I said, all right, as long as we don't change anything else. So they put more of that in. They wanted to use the documents.
LA Times.
Yeah, the editors. I mean, and that's it's not like usually editors will do that. They'll think that, all reporters think that these documents are the godsend. Really, they're just, to me, they're really just legal. Yeah, but it's like, it was just a sporting evidence, but it helps the lawyers. They feel very comfortable then. And so then they want more and more. So they build more. They build Sabatino into a guy that I didn't think he was. I didn't know who he was. I didn't, when he called me, I never heard of him. And I thought that was strange, and the whole thing about him being a white guy, a young guy. But it doesn't mean he wasn't there. I mean, and I deal with lots of criminals. I mean, my whole sourcing network basically is detectives, ex-detectives, and criminals. most of the criminals. And because, you know, I believe that criminals know more about crime than anything, you know, and especially if you can get to criminals who are in the circumference of the crime. And the best thing is when you can get the guys who did it. You know, in this case, that's what I had. And so then the story comes out. In the first 10 days, we got 1 million hits on that story. First day it ran. And so now the paper's all thrilled. They didn't even care about the story. And the other thing is that they offered me this idea. Would you like to be the first investigative project to break online? You know, they'd never done that before. And I said, yeah, sure. And really, it was kind of like they didn't want to fight. My stories were a big fight always to get in the paper. And so we went this way. We had more space. We put up the graphics and all that crap. And so we went with it. And the story was just like ripping around the world for the first, I think it was 10 days later when the smoking gun story came out. And I think that it was, I did these chats and all this stuff with the paper, for the paper. They killed all those later on too. Now, what happened then is when he wrote his story, I knew the guy, Bill Gaston, smoking gun. I didn't know him, but I met him once, and I've always liked his, you know, I like what he does. And so he called me the night before and says, I'm sorry to do this, this is what's happening, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I can't believe this. You know, this is like crazy. He called me actually on the Monday the story broke. When I came out, he said, those FBI documents, what about those FBI documents? And I said, like, what? You know, he said, well, where did you get them? I said, I got them from federal court. He said, there's something funny about it, you know. And that's all he said. I didn't hear from him again until that night. And he was a Village Voice reporter, so he reported a lot on Mafia stuff. And so he saw lots of FBI 302s from the East Coast. So that's all I can assume what these had a different type. And he turned out, I believe he's right. There's still been no proof that those are fake documents, but I believe he's right. And I believe that Sabatino set it up. And I was definitely set up. I go to this court to get a document, and the document's fabricated. I mean, I don't know that. Nobody knows that I give it to. In fact, 3 weeks before the story ran, I gave it to Lichtman, who was Henchman's lawyer. And he had it for 3 weeks before the story broke. He didn't say anything. I mean, they look real. Or, I mean, you can state the other, if you look what he said in MTV that week after this all blew up then with Smoking Gun. Now everybody hates me. It's all about the documents. And it was never about the documents, you know, but the paper's like furious, and whatever Henchman's lawyer is saying, they're believing him, you know. They completely believe him. They don't believe anything I say. I have no idea why, to this day.
Because money is evil if it's not handled right. If you lose your composure, you can do anything. And fear got stronger than love, and niggas did things that they know they wasn't supposed to do.